Good morning and welcome back. I'm so glad to welcome you all today again in the final journey and the final day of the Think Tank Central Conference, the third annual meeting. And we have a better weather today, so I hope we can have a lovely coffee break and lunch in the courtyard, so let's hope for that. But we would like to begin today with a keynote speech to talk about liberty, freedom, whatever you might want to say that is that. We heard a lot of different definitions yesterday, but I'm very honored to welcome to the stage Terry Anker, board member of Liberty Fund. He will deliver today the keynote speech, so everyone is waiting now for you.
So let's start by who am I? My primary business is a holding company in the United States that has 13 companies in it, 4 of which I own outright, and 9 I have other business partners in. But philanthropically, I've been involved in this space that many of you have come to know for many decades. In addition to serving on the board as a trustee of Liberty Fund, I also am on the Goodrich Foundation. There are a number of organizations in this room that have been benefited by the Goodrich Foundation over the years. Also, I'm a voting member of the American Institute of Economic Research, AIER. If you don't receive their newsletters, you should. The same, I think, with Liberty Fund. And then I'm a trustee for a large American university system, which has about, I think now we're just under 190,000 students enrolled. So this is what's brought me to this place to stand in front of you today. My objective is a couple things. One, to talk about what it is that we do, and then talk about how it is that we can do what we're doing more effectively, which is something that I've spent a great deal of time and energy working on over the last many years. Do something here real quick. 50% of my remarks were to be adverbs and adjectives because I'm an American, so everything is a superlative. In fact, I am the king of superlatives, the master of them. But after the remarks last night from Robin talking about Lady Thatcher's view on speech making, I'll attempt to get right to the point. So what is it that trustees do? Well, I think we have 3 responsibilities primarily. The first is to manage the financial capital that's been entrusted to us. I look at Robert's work on putting together this conference, and it's been remarkably well managed. And I think we received good value. But making sure that that investment that was made by benefactors, whether it's any of us in the room or someone who was deceased long before we came to this earth, that we're managing that financial capital as responsibly as we possibly can. The second is the investment in intellectual capital, making sure that the quality of intellectual discourse is absolutely top rate. Certainly at Liberty Fund or AIR, that means that we seek the best academics or the best thought leaders and try to nurture and bring along young people that will soon fill those roles. But the final is this investment in social capital, meaning are we bringing people together that belong together? And if so, how do we go about doing that? So when you think about this investment that we're making in that piece of social capital, who do we desire to hear us? Who is it that we're speaking to specifically? And so the worlds of policy and think tanks, perhaps it is influencing elected officials, members of the MPs, for example, or members of Congress in the United States. In our world, it's about influencing or reaching out to intellectual leaders, whether they're public intellectuals or they're members of the academy or they're business owners, to ensure that the thoughts that we have are being considered in a live way, not as some sort of an antiquarian, quaint past. It's interesting, so when Goodrich started, Pierre Goodrich, the founder of Liberty Fund, started publishing the collections of Adam Smith, they were largely out of print. It would be remarkable for me to imagine that there isn't a Liberty Fund book, for example, in the library of every person in this room. And if you're somebody that reads online, it's probably even more likely I'll give you an interesting example. Liberty Fund gives away anything that we can, that we have the rights to, which may be in any given month in China or Africa might be 300,000 downloads. The United States is still drawing the most downloads, but it's mostly because students can look for keywords. In other words, you can find out how many times Adam Smith said wealth. But then those numbers will drop to 0 in China, for example. I've often wondered if that means that everyone in China has read everything that they wanted to read, or if there's some reason that people don't want Bastiat to be available to students in places around the world. But that's not concerning to me, because as time passes, those numbers will go back up again. The people that we want to read are finding us. What's more concerning to me is the students and others who are not reading that have open access to it. And we can entertain reasons why. People don't read books, or people are learning from social media, but I'm not sure that I'm convinced. I think the mission is our responsibility. So first, who is it that we desire to hear us? And then second is, can they hear us? Are we finding a way to get to the people that we're looking to reach wherever they happen to be? In the United States, for example, right now, male participation in universities is at the lowest recorded since we've paid attention to it, which would be fine if those men were taking jobs and doing other things, but labor participation rates in men under 25 in the United States are at the lowest rate that they've ever been recorded. So people are simply withdrawing from the public space. I imagine our responsibility is not to wring our hands and be concerned about the state of the world. Our responsibility is to take some action in finding a way to do those three things that we talked about a few minutes ago. Manage the financial capital that's given to us, manage the intellectual capital that we are bringing to the world, but making sure that we're investing properly in the social capital. I think that sometimes we find ourselves cloistered in a room like this one, which is lovely, but we forget that the people that we're attempting to reach, I could say this certainly from Liberty Fund or AIR, we're publishing things every single day. Is it their fault that they're not reading it, or is it our fault that we're not getting it to them? I think that's a question that we've got to pay attention to. So the first is, who is it that we desire to hear us? The second is, can they hear us? In other words, are they in a place where they can hear us? And then finally, are they listening? I was talking yesterday with a member of this organization about what it is that's driving people away from these messages. And I think in some ways it's that we've lost command of a uniformity of language. So I would say the word capital, and many of us would understand what that means. Immediately, it's ingrained. But I might talk about capital to the friends of my children, and they have an entirely different idea of what capital means. And those words are being taught. It's not as though they spring from the womb with an understanding of what capital or capitalism or socialism or communism means. They're things that they're extracting from the environment around them. And I sometimes think that we start the conversation somewhere in the middle, assuming that the listener, that the people that we're attempting to have hear us, have already the baseline of understanding that we have. And so we're constantly perplexed about their lack of interest in what it is that we're talking about. But I imagine it's much like me attempting to speak Spanish, which is I understand some, but not enough to really get the context right. I have to slow down and think very carefully about the palabras and make sure that I'm making my choices cautiously and intentionally. And when we're talking to the uninformed, those people that are that have a different perspective perhaps than we do, I think too often we start with assumptions about what they understand or they believe that they understand about our perspective, about the words that we use and the things that we say. Communication is certainly the role of an educator, which are the areas that I generally spend my time in, I suppose, as a philanthropist, but also as a business leader. If my team, if the people who are in my employ do not understand what it is that we are intending to do, there's no possible way that they can get to a successful deliverable for our company. And so I wonder about the work that we are going to do after we leave this meeting today. But by the way, the Philadelphia Society, which is something that I think is very similar to this organization, which deals with center and center-right individuals and organizations in the United States, starts its meeting today. So I'm here advancing the European idea of the center-right rather than the U.S. doing the same. But I would give the exact same remarks there. which is that we know what it is that we hope to accomplish, but we have great difficulty in understanding the gap between what we're saying and what it is that's being heard by the people who are receiving the message from us. When we talk about conservative, how does that sound? What is that message that's being carried forward? All too often, I think it means closed-minded or uninterested, which most assuredly is not the case. But this notion of understanding and being willing to reach to people where they are as opposed to expecting or demanding that people come to us is the key, I believe, to finding our way. Persuasion is less about our voice and more about having the listener hear it. Louder is not more effective. The question, of course, then becomes, well, how do we get that message there? Is it through good scholarship? Many times over the years, I've run into a salesperson who works in one of our companies who will come back to me and say, I'm so terribly frustrated, our customers are stupid, which is one of the great examples of a bad salesperson. But he says our customers are stupid, that they don't understand our product. Well, of course, the problem is not the product, it's the salesperson. It's not the customer. The customer is the person who's trying to benefit their own life. If, in fact, Hayek was correct and we're all self-interested and we all act in our own self-interest, which, of course, I believe that we do, then we must find a way to express what it is about our point of view that is beneficial to the self-interest of the listener. And I think we gap there sometimes. We become frustrated. We bicker and fight between ourselves. Of course, the objective of this conference over the last few days has been to have these debates. But I think the real objective of this conference over the last few days is not to highlight the differences, but to highlight the ability of individuals to learn to get along in spite of the fact that their views might be different. James and Yaron yesterday, for example, have very different views, but we're all largely in the same space. And we've got to project that unity to the world outside if we hope to remain relevant. I think about this loss of males, for example, in the academy. And I've spoken on more than one occasion with university leadership, certainly of the university where I'm a trustee, and out of enormous frustration because there was no acceptance of the fact that these realities are occurring for some reason. So finally I said in a meeting once, do we believe that men are stupid? And of course, people are passing out and becoming very exaggerated by the reaction to that. Because if we do believe that, I think we have a fundamental problem. If we believe that the listeners are not getting our ideas because they're stupid, or they're unwilling, or they've been brainwashed by some academic leader somewhere, then we've given up before we've started. The real issue about men not attending universities is much deeper. Perhaps it's that we're not educating for men. Perhaps we're educating in a way that isn't consistent with the way that men learn. Perhaps the men are doing something for different reasons. But I'm certain that we need to ask those questions. And so the same thing to ourselves. If we're not receiving the kind of following on our social media accounts that we hope to, why is that? I can predict why it is that the Chinese downloads of Adam Smith dropped to 0, and I doubt very much that it's because everyone in China has read all the Adam Smith they care to see. But I don't know for a fact, because it's very difficult to get to the bottom of it. But we're not willing to give up unless we can reopen that pipeline and begin to see those downloads occurring again. We look at where downloads are occurring in Africa. Many of you knew Linda Whetstone, for example. And we worked with Linda to find out where those pockets are and to carry that message forward. In the United States, we advanced the work of young scholars, for example, who really are locked out of journals. Simply their point of view is no longer considered to be mainstream in many of the academic journals, and they can't move forward unless they can express their point of view in a much larger way. Finding that path to make sure that we're making an investment in social capital. I think in this room, certainly, we make investments in intellectual capital. We pay people to write columns, to write papers, to be focused on high-quality intellectual work. In Liberty Fund, for example, or AIER, we run presses, and I think Liberty Fund now has something like 508 volumes that wrap up about 480 books that have been in print for about 65 years, many. And there are new books being published all the time. AIER is publishing something almost daily, but certainly bound volumes on a quarterly basis. But does it really matter? Well, it doesn't matter if those books aren't being read, if they're not being seen, if the social network of those ideas is not being nurtured and maintained. I think about what's happening here, and the thing that's so exciting for me, thank you for inviting me to be a part of this, is to see that there is a network of conservative thinkers in Europe. Margaret Thatcher, Lady Thatcher, would be delighted to see us here together. But I think she would be very concerned about our hand-wringing and our worry that Europeans are not listening, or Americans are not listening, or men are stupid, which is why they're not going to university. Instead, I think if Lady Thatcher and President Reagan were sitting here today, they would be optimistic, and they would look positively at the future, and they would be thinking directly about how do I communicate with a thinking European who will understand and believe what we do if they see these ideas. One of the things that I often will express when talking about notions of free speech or the lack of speech is that people who do not have confidence in their ideas lock down speech because they're afraid. They're afraid of other people seeing those ideas or hearing those things. There are reasons why we follow where downloads are occurring around the world, and the most authoritarian countries are the ones that the most directly and immediately block access to the kind of thought that's here. So our job is not to have that fear, to put our ideas out into the world and hope as many people as possible will look at them and tell us we're wrong, help us learn from our own naivety and shortcomings, because I'm sure that we have some. Even as we get older, they stick with us. And so we imagine our responsibility today, and I'm almost done. We can argue about the peculiarities of a specific word choice or about the legitimate substance of an argument, certainly. But we cannot argue about the exchange of ideas being central to the advancement of civilization. And if we believe that our ideas are the ones that are correct, then we've got to put those ideas out there in the most receptive way that we possibly can. Whether it's talking to young people, which I love this expression, young people, it's something that we say all the time, I'm not sure what it means. I think that, for young people in the U.S., what it means is someone that you can take advantage of and get to pay way too much for an education that isn't worth it. Maybe that's what young people means. But I think what young people means in this case is the unthoughtful, meaning the open-minded, those who have not received the thought. But there are millions of Europeans and tens of millions of Americans who have forgot these thoughts or have never heard them. And I think our responsibility is to find them. It's easy to go to a young mind because one can presume that they don't have as many calcified thoughts as maybe an adult would have. But our responsibility is to reach to all of them. I don't think that we have any right to limit our discourse or our discussion to any particular age group. What matters to a healthy family? What matters to a healthy state? What matters to a healthy body? Maybe wine, maybe maybe a little beer if you go to Oktoberfest, which I did before I came here, but certainly ideas. Are we nourishing the body politic with the better ideas? Are we making sure that those ideas are being heard? Are we identifying the listener that might hear those ideas wherever they happen to be? Or are we sitting in a basement room pounding the table about how frustrated that people aren't listening to us? Are we finding a way to find those listeners, even though they may not know it, getting a message to them and making sure that that exchange is an open and realistic one? I hope so, although it's difficult to talk about exchange when you're giving a lecture, right? I'm grateful for your time this morning. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you, because I think your speech was sort of a wake-up call for conservatives in Europe and for us to understand the power that education has on creating a new future for not only for Europe, but also for the United States, the alliance between us. And we are moving now to the roundtables, and I'm sure we're going to keep talking about this because one of them, the first one, will be about future, next generation, what's the future holds for us. Now that in Europe especially we're seeing the young people is losing the fear to speak, to say what they think, and then losing the fear to be canceled for what they think or what they might say. That's why we are seeing a lot of young people voting to the right in the elections, not only in Italy, Spain, Poland, Hungary. So we are now talking the first roundtable about the next generation. It will be in room 2.5, but if you want to keep talking about what libertarian and national conservatives get in common, if they can get along, you can go to the internship room in the main table, in the main floor. And that will be the first set of round tables this morning. Then we will have a coffee break, and then we will keep with the round tables, where you will get all the information in the website, and we will also remind you where the round tables will be. So if you are attending now to our last plenary session before the closing speech, and as you could see in the program, it's called 2024, The Path Ahead of the Freedom Movement. And as you might know, we have elections coming up in Europe next year on June 2024. So with the moderation of Robert Tyler, that he will be your moderator for this plenary session, Senior Policy Advisor at New Direction, you will all hear the expert talking about the freedom movement and what is ahead of us, especially thinking about the elections that we have in Europe next year. So yours.
Well, thank you so much. And I'll quickly go through and introduce our panel. We have Jorge Soler, the Director of International Relations here at CEFAS, Barbara Kolm, who we all know now is the President of the Austrian Economic Center, and Witold Dyszewie, who is the Director of New Direction. I always love this panel. We've done it 3 times now at Think Tank Central. It's a chance for us to look back on the whole conference and to reflect and to think what messages we can take, what lessons have we learned, what can we put practically into effect to go forward as a movement. So I'll start by getting a first reaction. What have you thought of the conference? What would you take away from it? Jorge first.
Jorge. Okay, thank you. Well, for me, it's been the first time, and well, I have to confess that I'm a little bit surprised by the interesting and exciting discussions, conversations, comments. I think that there is no unanimity, which I think is a good thing. I think there are some people from Bulgaria. We say here in Spain, I don't know if it's the same expression in other places, that when you win something Bulgarian style is that you get 99.9% of the votes. So I think this is something we usually talk about. And I think that definitely this is not a good thing. And here we don't live in this atmosphere, so we can disagree, we can discuss, and I think this is the first thing that has surprised me. On the other hand, I would say that I've seen also a common ground. We can disagree in many things, but we agree in some. I think we can find a common ground. We can agree in some big issues. That's why we can be together and we can act as a movement. I've seen also this tension, I would say, between, as we saw yesterday, between more liberalism or libertarianism, individualism, and conservative, national conservatives, even populist positions. Also, this tension between economy and culture. And I think that's healthy, but on the other hand, I think that in the last meeting room, Stephen Bartoliga has said something it has sounded very well to me. It's nice to imagine a world of isolated people, but the real world is not exactly like this, So I think that if we want to be relevant and if we want to win elections, we do not have to abandon our focus on freedom, but we have to be very to realize and be very conscious that freedom does not flourish in the void, but needs an ecosphere, needs law, rule of law, order, needs what is the Western civilization? That's why it has flourished in the Western civilization. Talking about, I found also very interesting some of the remarks made, for instance, but by many people. But I would say this morning it has sounded Terry Anker when he said that sometimes there's that gap between what we are saying and what people understand. And I think that this is a key issue. To translate political ideas to ideas in political terms and to make them attractive. When I was thinking about next European elections next year, I was thinking that I'm talking from my perspective, my point of view of a Spaniard living in Spain, and I see that my compatriots they are not very excited about Europe, about the European elections. They are very focused on our national disputes, elections. So, how to explain them that that next elections will be key, will be important, will be very relevant for our future, and that our future depends on what happens in the European Union. So, and also I think that regarding next elections, many people, many of my compatriots think that there's nothing to be done. Europe is completely corrupted. It's lost. It's somewhere that we have seen it in the past. There were some referendum, and it doesn't matter because at the end of the day, it's the will of the Commission of the European bureaucracy will impose what will happen. So we have to explain them that there is hope, that there is a possibility of changing things. And I think this is something that we should do. We as think tanks, as politicians, journalists, all of us here, we should try to explain them what is happening, why it's important, what happens in Europe for us, and give them a reason to go to the polls and vote for us.
Barbara?
Well, thank you. I was just looking into the opening remarks from 3 years ago, from Portugal back then, from Lisbon, and there are things that are still relevant, like, for example, private property, free enterprise, individualism that we need to support, limited government that, totally, after 2 years of COVID and other things, have totally turned around and are even in a worse shape than they were before, the rule of law and the bottom-up orders of organic communities. So those were the terms back then that I coined, and I have to say, apart from big government, big state, we as a group, we as center-right people have come a long way. And we have, I think, achieved a lot. With regards to this conference, there are 3 things that I think we can take that are very positive. First of all, the format that we changed, and I think this way of discussion on equal terms and on eye level was much better than the upfront or kind of ex cathedra discussions that we had in earlier conferences. This is one thing that we take away, or that I would take away. Then I heard, and I think this is very relevant from one of our friends here, that we should take more time for us to discuss, so longer breaks, maybe more beer or whatever, as this is the term of the day, obviously. And I think that the mix of the groups was really also an add-on to what we have seen earlier within our movements in Europe. So thank you all for joining us and for working with us and together. And as you all know, I'm a big fan of collaboration, the division of labor. I think if we continue on that front, we will have a good outcome for the European elections. But in order to do that, and I will then hand over to Witold, I think we should tell the people to go back to the basic principles, the 4 European freedoms, the subsidiarity principle, and I would call it re-democratization of Europe. You know, the legitimization of Brussels, especially the Commission, and make sure people understand that this is a self-elected bubble there, and I'm talking about the Commission, and they need to constantly be pushed, and I think it will be our task in whatever opportunities, or in whatever opportunities we have, whether it's students groups, whether it's it's the business groups, it's the taxpayers groups, it's the political party groups, whether it's the think tanks, whether it's the academics, because they also play a very important part. Constantly push for that and put the facts on the table. And the last thing, apart from the checks and balances, we as economists always try to present the hard facts. But we should also reconquer the moral high grounds. This was mentioned many times, and obviously we have not done it enough, although we all try. But this is for us the task for the next couple of months, to reconquer those moral high grounds again.
Witold?
Yes, I will just take first 1 minute to say thank you to a few people, because I spent 2 days to push you from one room to another room. First of all, I would like to say, of course, thank you to Barbara, because I think we had that idea together, and to the Austrian Economic Center. Thank you also for bringing one part of the family who is, of course, more connected to you, and to bring them here in Madrid. Thank you, of course, to CEU CEFAS for hosting us. I think it was a great place for us to be here. Thank you very much. It was, from my point of view, it was very important to be in a place which kind of Christian symbol. We always go to a hotel, to a nice lobby, but actually the music is awful and the food is not always very good. So thank you very much for having us here today in this office, and also having the church on the wall. For me, it's important. It means that we have some values that we can still defend. And last but not least, I would like to say thank you to our most important partner in Spain, Dicenzo. Thank you for your help. Thank you also for making this event possible. Thank you for all the other projects that we do together, and I know that we have more to come. Having said that, like you, I think the format was a good idea. It was a bit risky, because it's a new format, but what I liked is that apart from the format, also we had quite good debates, but nobody was killed and nobody was attacked. It means that we didn't have any communists in that room, so it's also a good success. Also, I think that we covered all the issues that will be very important for the EU elections. I hope that we haven't missed one, and if yes, please let us know. We will add it in the agenda for next year. So we talk about culture, we talk about foreign policy, economy. And last but not least, I think the most important thing is that we saw during these 2 days that we have a lot in common. But we spend also a lot of time to see what we don't have in common. And the question of this panel is to see what we can do during the EU elections. I think that, first of all, we need to make sure that we will increase the number of seats in the parliament in our majority before seeing what we don't have in common. It means that we know that we have one enemy, is the left. If we keep that in mind, I think that during national elections, if our colleagues from EPP or other political groups can spend less time in attacking our political parties in ECR group and spending more time maybe to attack the left, maybe a big majority will be able in the parliament. And then we will see case by case on which policies we can vote together. But the problem nowadays is that EPP cannot find a big majority on the right, maybe a bit because of them, and so they are obliged to vote with the left, with Renew, which is not a liberal group anymore, or I would say they forgot the definition of that. So that's the main takeover of me. First, let's stay together, let's win the election, let's make sure that we have a bigger majority, let's make sure that we can work together, and then once we'll have that majority, we'll be able to work on the differences that maybe we might have on some policies. I think also that one of the consequences of that situation is maybe we are a bit too pragmatic. When we start to run for election, we already think about how implementing the political program. And we already focus on the divergences that we can have. While actually, no, we should focus on first winning the election and then implementing our program with our stakeholders. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to see the kind of common theme, this idea that throughout this last couple of days, we've had these big discussions. We've been able to approach it from different sides. You know, if you were in the last debate on immigration, you can see that at times there are really big divisions between us. But then if you were in the session this morning about where fusionism goes from now, you can see that ultimately it's sometimes the tyranny of small differences. And that actually, as Witold says, once you start looking at the big picture and get over these tiny details, you start to realize that there is a bigger movement of us. You know, we're not the minority like the left wants us to think we are. We are in a majority. There are more of us around. You know, look at where we're winning elections in Europe now. And it's a sign that times are changing. People are coming back to basic principles. You know, you could almost define it as common sense conservatism, this idea that we, on the right and in the conservative and classical liberal movement, have the pragmatic and practical answers that we need to fix people's daily lives. But I can't remember who said it. Somebody, I think, described it perfectly when they said that our problem on the right is sometimes we're too polite. We don't get in the gutter. We don't fight for our values. We just take them for granted. And I think what's been good in the last couple of days is this kind of opportunity to hash out what our differences are and find that common ground. So I'm wondering if there are any of the panels that you've sat through where you found perhaps a single topic or a number of topics where we're definitely the majority in agreement and we can move on with that. Yeah, Barbara.
I think it was just one of the opening panels on regulation or deregulation. I think was actually an eye-opener, because I took the notes there and I thought, well, we could actually immediately send out a declaration and use all the comments and all the valuable ideas and thoughts that were made there for policy papers, and use it from Portugal to Romania, from Scandinavia down to Spain, Italy, whatever, Greece, wherever you want. These things are there, and this can only be achieved if we, again, collaborate. And after all, I would say the common denominator is freedom. And unfortunately, the sad events in Ukraine have shown us finally that we cannot take this for granted, and that we constantly need to fight for it. And if we transmit that as a group together for the elections, we should definitely have a better outcome, hopefully for the center-right at the next time.
If I may jump in, I had, during the same panel, I had the same conclusion, but maybe from a different point of view. I think if we have one thing in common is the will to protect subsidiarity in Brussels. Meaning, you mentioned the regulation is one part, but it's not just about the regulation. To make sure that we don't give too much power to Brussels. Brussels is a big word, to the Commission. If we if every time we have a bill in front of us, if every time we have a debate, we think about the fact that by giving them a bit much power to Brussels, actually in 10 years they will be totally powerful on that topics. If you open the door, let's think about defense. The EU started to set up a new funds for funding some EU defense project. In 20 and 25 years, I can bet that we'll have a EU army because they're starting like that slowly but surely. We always need to think, shall we put that issue on the EU level or shall we keep it on the national level? And I think that this answer to this question, we should have the same, and we will have the same in the future. Thank you.
Yes, I was reviewing my notes, and I would say that there's agreement, for instance, as you have said, in how this European bureaucracy perpetuates itself, how this politics like the Green Deal is, I said sustainability is unsustainable because how regulation affects competitiveness, how the European Union makes our lives more complex and expensive. I'm less free. And I would say that when I was hearing this and I thought that we all agree, and as you said, Barbara, freedom is the bottom, the basics. I said, I think it's our task as a think tank to show to people that rejecting this mentality, this bureaucratic mentality, someone said in Brussels, if it moves, it taxes. If it moves, you tax it. How to show it without appearing as monsters. And another point that I've seen that we all agree is the importance of reinforcing society, starting from the family, from the basic. We have in one panel talk about values, parental rights, the Hungarian experience, but I would say we have to recover the ability to build a heritage and the ability to give it to our offsprings, to our sons and daughters, to transmit our property without the state taking it from us. And I think that's also another point we all agree.
Let me add that I was very impressed with the last panel that Lorenzo Montanari ran with the young generation. What they kind of put on the table as bullet points for the discussion on the one hand, but on the other hand, that those conservative, center-right young people understand that Europe is competing within the new G7 now, and that the values and the level of discussion and the entire geopolitical issues that tie into that are totally different than they were just only 2 years ago or 1 year ago. And I want to thank this generation for being so smart and active, and I would just encourage you, just use the networks, use all the hands, even the little fingers you can get from everybody who is here in the room, and make sure you collaborate, and you collaborate, because otherwise we will not win the battle.
I would like to add, well, I would also like to thank Lorenzo, because probably for you it's something that you know, but for me it was really very interesting to know about all this network of organizations, of knowing people, of knowing what they are doing, and I think it's very useful. Thank you very much, Lorenzo.
And this is something I think that we're starting finally to get much better at, this idea that we need a vast network, that we need meetings like this, where you've all had a chance to meet each other. Now after this, you know who you need to contact. For example, if you need somebody to talk about regulation, you now have people to talk about regulation. If you need people to talk about foreign policy, you know who to contact. On immigration, on any topic, what the strength of a meeting like this is the ability to create this kind of intellectual network, a sort of network of, they used to use the phrase the Republic of Letters during the Enlightenment as the movement of thinkers who communicated with each other across Europe to spread their values. We need to do something similar. I don't know, we'll call it a Republic of Tweets or something. We can be more modern than letters. And so I sort of think there's strength in what we've heard. You've had an opportunity to listen to each other, to find out where you stand. Now go and do events with each other. You've exchanged business cards, phone each other, say, hey, I'm going to organize a conference on, I don't know, the war in Ukraine. You now have 5 people to contact on the war in Ukraine. Say you want to do something on better education and giving parents their rights back and so on. You have 5 people to contact about that. Like that's how we should start going. And I'm wondering now how we can galvanize that network and use it ahead of the next elections.
Well, I don't know, but for my part, I'm very excited to having met so many interesting people. From CIFAS here in CEU, I'm sure that we are going to contact to inform you of what we are doing, to hearing, and how we can translate this for the next European elections. I'm not sure, but what I would say is as I have said, is that we have to translate all these very high intellectual principles to narratives, to, I don't like the word, but to messages that people who are not so skilled or who normal people can understand and can be moved, as I have said, to go to the polls.
If I may then. Okay. I think that for New Direction, our goal is quite clear, and it's a very pragmatic one. What we have done in Madrid, in Tallinn, and in Lisbon last year, that's something that we should, of course, then offer to our national foundation. I think that New Direction is there just for our national foundation linked with the political parties. And all this knowledge network, we have to offer that to the foundation, to the parties, and they have to use it if they want, and to see in which direction. But in any case, I think that what we do now is just for New Direction, not at all, it's the opposite. It's a platform for all the national party, national foundation to help them to win the elections, to have more MEPs in Brussels. That's our main goal.
Yeah.
What we can humbly do with our position as the Austrian Economic Center, we can only offer that with the Free Market Roadshow that we run again next year prior to the elections, and for good reason, prior to the elections, that the message is out in each and every country and each and every capital and in most of the universities that we collaborate with, that the voters understand our mission, and that we invite you to also partner up and bring in your networks, so that we not only have 1,000 people or 500 people at an event, but that we have like 3,000 that have the message in a respective city. And from that, I think we can also take it. So this is our humble support that we can give, and we're happy to do so for the center-right movement.
And so I think, as a sort of final question, perhaps the next time we'll meet will be after these European elections. What should we look forward to? What should we be optimistic about? What should we take as a sort of spirit-lifting message as we leave here and get ready to fight those elections?
I hope that when we will meet after June, first of all, we will have much more MEPs. It means that something has been done. I'm not just saying in ECR Group, of course, it's our main goal for us, being a ECR Political Foundation, but all this big movement on the center-right. And if we can increase the number of MEPs, it means that already that we're on the good way. That's the first thing. But the second thing is to make sure that we have more MEPs on the left. And if we have more MEPs, of course, it means that, as you might know, we are a public foundation, it means that we receive money from the parliament. So as you can see, not all the public funding are bad. We make also sometimes a good use of it. And I think that if we have also more MEPs, it means that we have also bigger budget, and we will be also in a position to help even more our national foundation. It is, and that's how we should do it every time, to make sure that step by step we increase our power.
Well, I wish that the center-right movement across Europe is much stronger, and that in the Hayekian sense, and I mentioned that on the first evening, the central planning is totally reduced, and that we get rid of this idea out of Brussels, but we come back to the good old subsidiarity principle and the reason, and the competition and achievement principle, self-responsibility that have made Europe successful in the past. And this is, I think, our goal that we need to definitely put forward.
I hope that next time,
And achieve.
if all things go well, we can talk deeply about this proposal of democratization, of recovering this principle of subsidiarity, and on how we are able to change the rules, the treaties, because it's not just that the problem is that the wrong people are in charge, but the problem is that we have created something that by its own nature produces all this. So I think that we should talk about how to really reform it.
And it certainly feels to me that in the last couple of days, what we've had is a kind of reaffirmation and a rediscovery of the values that we have in common, that we've realized where we stand as a movement, how we relate and connect to each other, what kind of a network we have built for ourselves, and of course, how we can keep expanding it. There's a lot of new people here with us this time. Hopefully there'll be even more next time. So until then, we'll see you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have now left our closing speech. But before that, let me thank you all for sharing your ideas, also what concerns you, what worries you, and thank you for being here. And to finish, before the lunch, we want to look to Latin America. The closing speech will be delivered by Ernesto Fraga Araujo, a Brazilian diplomat and Brazil's former Foreign Affairs Minister of Foreign Affairs. So to finish, we talk a lot about Europe, about the United States, the alliance, the transatlantic alliance, but now we want to finish looking to Latin America.
So, is it good morning or good afternoon? I'm not sure. But great to be here with you all today. First of all, thank you very much to New Direction, especially to Witold, for the invitation to be here, this great opportunity. Thank you to Fundación Disenso, my dear friends of that spectacular institution, which is part of a spectacular project, which is the Vox Party of Spain. Thank you to Seu Cefas and to all of you here. Yesterday, I think it was Barbara Köln that mentioned that we are here among politicians, members of think tanks, and academia, right? And I'm none of these, totally, and at the same time, I'm partly each one of those. I'm a little bit of each. I talk about politics. I have seen a lot of politics and policy. I'm not affiliated to any think tanks, but I feel at home among think tanks, representatives. And I'm not in academia, although I teach, and together with two friends, we just started an online endeavor, which we call an academy, a very modest one, where basically I teach a course about a subject that does not exist, which I call logo politics, which is politics under the light the Logos, right? This untranslatable concept that unites the world of the Greeks and the world of Christianity. But I don't fit in any of those categories, but I ask who does, who fits in any category. And more, our society wants us to subsume ourselves, to subjugate ourselves into some category, right? But the human being is not categorizable, is not definable. And a conservative is maybe someone who recognizes this undefinability at the heart of being human. To define is to put limits, the Latin finis, right, means limits, and humans don't like limits, right? When too many people start to accept limits at first, then to like limits, and then to impose limits on others, then we have what we have now, which is globalism, right? But I don't want to sound too much like a libertarian, so I'll say some conservative things as well. So we're here, obviously, in Spain, and I like words, I like names. España comes from Hispania, which comes from a Greek word, hesper, which means the West. So Hispania is the land of the West. It's the land where Hercules came for his 11th job, I think, which was to find beyond the what is today the Gibraltar Straits into the ocean, the land of, or the island of bliss, and the garden of the Hesperides. The Hesperides, the same root of Spain, were the nymphs, the sunset nymphs, daughters of Atlas, the figure who gave the name to the Atlantic, right? So maybe that land to the west was America, maybe an anticipation of America, so Latin America. In Latin America is probably, and I feel more or less, it would describe how I feel here among so many interesting people and many interesting subjects from a European and North American perspective. Latin America is maybe the forgotten cousin of the West, the lost tribe of the West, which Europe and North America too often have not considered part of the family, although we are so. Again, talking about names from our hotel rooms, the hotel where many of us are here in Madrid, we see this mountain range, right? And the neighborhood is Mirasierra, so that's a sierra, and we see it. And in my room, I don't know if yours, but there is a small tourism book about Sierra Morena. And I went, oh, that's not Sierra Morena, I think, from my geography. And I went to check, no, Sierra Morena is in Andalusia. So I believe that's the Guadarrama, right, to the north of Madrid, what we see. And why is that important? Because conservatives like names, they like to name things. So it's a mountain range, what does it matter? Because, at least for us who are Christians, God created everything through the Word, right? And Jesus Christ is the Logos incarnate. It's the Word, the one through whom everything was made, according to the Creed. So basically, God spoke the world into existence. And there's an interesting book by Tolkien, of course, much less known than the Lord of the Rings, Tolkien, a great Catholic writer, of course. A book called The Silmarillion, where Tolkien imagines a mythology where the world is created by music, by singing, by the gods singing. And maybe he wants to indicate through that idea, through that image, the following, that song, music only exists when it's performed, right? So it indicates that creation is not something that was done once and for all. It's something that needs to be continuously and permanently actualized, right? Again, still in the Bible, God left Adam to naming the creatures, the other creatures. So he asks Adam, okay, now the creatures come and you are going to give their names. So in a way, if creation is through the word mankind, so represented by Adam, is a co-creator. So names are very important. The Romans, to go back to the Romans, they used to say, nomen est numen, right? The name is the numinous, this sort of mysterious manifestation of the divine that the word numen captures. Right? And Christianity as a whole, it's too often, I think, wrongly considered a religion of the book. It's not. It's a religion of the living word, right? And not the letter on the book. So sometimes when you travel in the hinterlands of Brazil, of Spain, of the United States, elsewhere, at least I had that experience, you see a succession of small villages or little towns that look exactly like each other, but each one has a name, right? And you ask why? Why don't they just, are they not called, Village B9784, right? Or something like that? No, because with a name, they have their personality, they have their history, they have their atmosphere, they have their identity. My father used to know by heart the names of all the rivers that are tributary to the Amazon River, dozens of rivers. He learned that in school back in the 1920s. Right? I didn't learn that, but I learned the names of the 7 legendary kings of Rome. For some reason, I was taught that. Useless? No, I think it's extremely useful. I still know 6 of the 7. There's 7 that I always forget. So there's Romulus, Numa Pompilius, Servus Tullius, Ancus Marcius, Tarquinius Priscus, Tarquinius Superbus. There's one that I always miss. You can help me with that. But nowadays we don't give names anymore to things. Right? Things are losing their names, and the forgetting of names is perhaps a sign of the forgetfulness of being, about which the great philosopher Heidegger talks. It's part of the abandonment of the logos as well, the abandonment of man himself, or herself, of course. And when one thing is forgotten for more than one generation, it disappears, right? At least everything that exists in the world of our heads, of our minds, of our consciousness, of our heart, our soul, whatever you call it, it only exists as long as it's passed to the next generation. Otherwise, it disappears, right? The word soul, for example, people don't talk about the soul anymore. And if you have one generation that doesn't talk about the soul, there will be no soul anymore. The experience is linked to the word, right? And those things are the things that really matter. And we seem not to care about them anymore. Right? The world is being depopulated, not of people. Right? I know that Bill Gates and others are working hard on that. Right? But more important, the world is being depopulated of meaning. Right? Adam became mute. He can't give name to things anymore. That mountain over there, that mountain range, what is that called? I don't care. That's only a mountain that is there. That's a reaction of many things. And words and names, they have history. They have depth. They have a word is compacted history, right? Of a human experience, of a human endeavor. A word can teach us about past achievements, past problems. It can open way to new questions, to new avenues of thought. I use two words here that are very important: experience, experire in Latin. So ex, outside, perire means something like to go outside of yourself to look for something. That's what experience means. Endeavor comes from Old French, en devoir, devoir, duty, debere in Latin, which means to owe something. So those are different avenues that are there for us to explore. Explorare, also to have to go out of yourself. Right? But when words and names are lost, all that wisdom and epic history of mankind is lost. And conservatives like history, they like accumulated experience, they like openness to new experience as well, to new adventure, to new battles of thought. And we have many battles to fight for what we could call our internal frontier, right? The frontier that separates us not from barbarism, but from nothingness, from indifference. And that frontier is receding. We every day see that we become less sovereign over the space that we are ourselves. Every day, whole provinces of thought are lost. Things that could be said and felt can't be said and felt anymore. That impoverishes our internal territory. The inner world, the only world that really matters, right? It's being lost. I promise it will be my last, let's say, etymological part, but it's very interesting how the word world, and in Latin languages, mundo and its correlates, are being replaced by the word globalism or globe or global or planet, right? What's the difference between world and planet? Etymology helps us. World comes from old German Vereld. It's the age of man. It's the lifespan of a man. So world originally is not a geographic concept. It's an existential concept. Right? Your world is what you experience in your life. So it's individually linked, and it's linked to something much broader than the materiality of the planet. And planet doesn't have that sort of association. It's collective, it's material, it's indifferent. It doesn't, you don't call about your inner planet, right? So that's what we're living through. And we're losing philosophy. Because philosophy is not the search for knowledge. Philosophy is the search for wisdom. Again, like the word says, I promise that. But Sophia, everyone knows, right? That means wisdom, not knowledge. Those are different things. Doesn't mean that we don't care about knowledge. But that difference is important. And sometimes I see, with all due respect, that liberals are focused only on knowledge, and they forget about wisdom. And wisdom is that comes from the heart and not only from reason. So once you get a mathematical explanation for something, you know it, right? But that's not what philosophy is about. Philosophy is about involvement and participation. In order to understand Plato or Aristotle or anyone, you have to invest of yourself into that, and you are never going to capture fully that sort of truth. It's not there to be possessed. It's there to be lived and loved, right, through our thought. So I think conservatives are for knowledge, but they are also for wisdom. Okay, conservatives are for reason. They're not for irrationality. They just don't think that reason exhausts the human being. They are for the individual, but they don't think that you can ignore, of course, the community. We're talking about language. Language is an example of how we take that duality of individual and community and take it to the next level and overcome it without destroying it. So, because language, of course, it's about communication. It only makes sense if you transmit a meaning and that meaning is received by another person. At the same time, language is the expression of individuality. The linguists say that each person actually speaks a different language. There are no two people who speak the same language with the same meaning and pronunciation and grammar of everyone else. So recognizing dualities as a whole and overcoming them without destroying them, I think that's maybe the main point of about conservatism. Okay, enough theory. Now we're losing the world, right? And how is not only the world? How is that happening? One way, not the only way, but is the concept that global problems require global solutions. Right? So first, who gets to decide what the global problems are? And they decide that global problems are the problems that they have the solutions that they want to implement. Right? And those solutions are always solutions that come with less freedom. Right? There's no global problem that they would like to treat with more freedom. It's always with less and less freedom. Right? So I'm talking about they. Who are they? I call them the globalists, but in a different sense, because we need words, right? Maybe there's a better word. But who are the globalists, in my view? Three types of currents. You have China, communist China. You have the, what are more currently called the globalists of multilateralism, World Economic Forum, the mega billionaires, etc. And you have organized crime. You have those three pillars. Right? You would ask, well, what about communism? Communism is maybe the shape of all that. I also say that communism, that globalism is the communism of the 21st century. It's how those same forces that were at work in the Soviet Union, for example, how they now try to subjugate the human spirit and eviscerate it. Marx used to say that the aim of its program was to emancipate humanity. Right? So let's see. Marxism has the habit of, when it gets to power, inverting everything that they preached before achieving power. So in the 90s, for example, they wanted nations and cultures to be preserved in the face of globalization. When they got to power in different ways, now they're against nations and against cultural identification, now that they basically run globalization. The left always, for a long time, was against, for example, government spying into people's lives, spying into your emails. Recently, all the world broke loose about the domestic spying programs of NSA in the US, etc., because they were not in power. Now the left is in power, and they want everyone to be spied and surveilled and followed and controlled the whole time through any technological or non-technological means. So that's their pattern. Okay, once in power, they invert their program. And we can be so pretty sure that when Marx talked about emancipation of men, the program was about the enslavement of mankind once they got to power. And basically, that's their way of doing things. So, so again, China, communist country, not because we're saying, but because they say they are. Xi Jinping makes speeches after speeches saying, "Oh, we'll still Marxist, we're still communist. Don't dare think otherwise. They look towards world hegemony, as any communist program always looks. You have the multilateralists, the great resetters, who say you will own nothing and will be happy. And sometimes they're called the mega capitalists or ultra capitalists, and that's not a capitalist view, that you're going to, or liberals, what liberalism is there, what capitalism is there in this program of you're going to own nothing and be happy, right? And you have crime. It's less talked about, but they have a global structure that is everywhere, that dominates Latin America more and more, that dominates Russia, of course. And those mafias are integrated and getting more and more powerful. And those three currents, they work together. You are never going to see let's say, the Davos crowd doing anything against China. The opposite. Klaus Schwab has been saying that China is the model for the future. Or against organized crime. You're never going to see China doing anything against the Davos crowd or organized crime. And of course, you're never going to see organized crime doing anything against Davos or China. So they always work without hindering each other, and many, many times in cooperation, closer or not so close. So it's the Davos, Beijing, Caracas axis, as I like to call. And what's their instrument? Their instrument is, again, word, the control of speech, the control of discourse. There's a book that was called the Communist, I mean, not the title, but it was called by Marxists as the Communist Manifesto of the 21st Century. It's the book Empire by Michael Hart and Antonio Negri. And if you permit me, I'll briefly quote from it. They say, difference, hybridity, and mobility are not liberatory in themselves, but neither are truth, purity, and stasis. Basically here he's contrasting truth and difference. So contrasting the notion of absolute truth with the notion of multiculturalism. But then there's the most important part that comes after. Truth will not make us free, but taking control of the production of truth will. And you know what making free means for Marxists, right? As you just saw, it means enslaving. And they follow. The real truth commission of empire, the empire that they want to build, will be constituent assemblies of the multitude, social factories for the production of truth. So I think that's where the core of their program is, the production of truth. Old-style communism worked for and, I mean, did everything to control the means of physical production, to control the factories, to control the agricultural fields, etc. They realized that's not the way anymore. Now they want to control the word. They want to control speech. They want to control what they call production of truth. Well, truth cannot be produced. Truth is something that you strive to achieve. You have a respect for truth that comes from the Greek philosophers. But no, they have a different view of truth. Truth is something that is produced. It's the narrative. That's basically the narrative. And what are those factories for the production of truth? Media, universities, academia, schools, well, their think tanks, and social networks. They were losing them. Now they want to impose censorship in that because they want to have those also as centers for the production of truth, their truth, obviously. So we have to liberate truth, and I think, again, coming to Christianity, it can give us some hints, even for those who are not Christians, about freedom and about truth. Truth is essential to Christianity, but I would say that freedom is even more essential to Christianity. Normally, when we think about Christianity, or many times we think about authority and morals, but that's not the essence of the faith. The word freedom or its correlates appear no less than 38 times in the New Testament, and always in the key passages. And in the Lord's Prayer that Christians say every day, or should, it ends with, in Latin, it said, libera nos a malo, right? Set us free from evil. It's not keep evil away from us. It's set us free from evil. Libera nos a malo. So it means that evil is already here, and it has the form of the lack of freedom, and we pray to be delivered from it, so to get freedom from that. That's the essence of the religion. In the passage that, of the Christian religion and Christian faith, in the passage that Hart and Negri alluded to, you see Jesus saying, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. So truth is not the ultimate objective. The ultimate objective is freedom. So you shall know the truth. Okay, and once you know the truth, this will set you free. So freedom is the final goal. Okay, and to end with and I'm about to end everything, but and to end about this part about Christianity and freedom, a verse that I like a lot is in the letter of St. Paul to the Galatians, when he said, "It was for freedom that the Christ set us free." Okay, te eleutheria hemas ho Christos eleutherosen. So it's kind of circular. The communists, they want power to have more power. I think Christians in this sense, but maybe other conservatives, they want freedom in order to, for what? In order to have more freedom. And that's there in the New Testament. Well, why, and that's the last part, why everything is happening in that way, why we're losing freedom. One interpretation is that basically in 1989, 1991, it was supposed that capitalism had defeated communism. And in the 90s, the West, which was sovereign over the world, supposed that a liberal economy could work without a cultural and national base under it. So that you could have a liberal economy without a conservative society or a conservative-oriented society. So they dispensed with conservatism. They thought that they could live with knowledge without wisdom. And during the 90s, basically, the developed economies, developed countries, and the idea of developed countries already economic-oriented, as you see, they worked in a vacuum of ideas until around 2000, when the communists realized that they didn't need to fight against globalization. They realized, well, the cockpit is empty. There's no pilot. So let's get into the cockpit and pilot globalization ourselves. And that's what the program of Hart and Negri is, the manifesto of the 21st century. So what they call empire is globalization. And they don't say, let's fight the empire. It's not the United States, it's more than that, the new structure of power in the world. Let's not fight against that. Let's take hold of that. Because they let the cockpit open. They let the machine room open. Let's go into there. So that's what's happening. And of course, they started to drive globalization away from freedom. Right? Brazil is and was an example of that, and I witnessed most of it. The Bolsonaro administration, of which I was proudly a part, and not a part. It got rid of conservatives. They decided that conservatives were a nuisance, that they could only have the pragmatists and the technocrats. I was, in the receiving end of that sort of evolution or involution. So we don't need, it's not about myself, it's about the values of conservatism that myself and one other friend represented in the cabinet. So what happened with all that pragmatism? They lost the election. Now Bolsonaro could be arrested at any moment. He's still called a fascist. They don't care that he made a more pragmatist approach. Right? And the pragmatist parties that he made an alliance with have just turned last week into official support of the Lula left-wing government. So that's the experience I had. Okay. Liberty has been killed in Brazil. We have no rule of law anymore, no freedom of speech, no freedom of association, no separation of power. The Supreme Court is admittedly, in the words of one of its, in the public words of one of its justices, a political institution. He says, well, the Supreme Court became a political institution. And basically Brazil is run by a triangle, which is corrupt, dominated Congress, the Supreme Court with that sort of partiality and partisanship, and of course an executive headed by a man formerly convicted for corruption. So I call it the dictatorship of the corruptariat. Right? The old Marxists would advocate for a dictatorship of the proletariat. Now the new revolutionary class, which is driving the change toward the left, is the corruptariat, which is much more powerful than the proletariat was. Right? And to end, so about Latin America, I already spoke of Latin America as the lost tribe of the West. It's a numerous tribe. There are, last time I checked, there are 667 million people in Latin America. In Europe, if you exclude Russia, which doesn't consider itself West, you have 610. So there are more Westerners in that sense, or descendants of Hercules in his search for the Hesperides in Latin America than in Europe, and in the United States, of course, which is even less. So, but what happens is that now Latin America belongs basically to China, Russia, and Iran, and it belongs to organized crime. So, and to a certain extent, they belong to the Davos crowd, which helps those two get along. First, during the 90s, first, that was our fault, but it was also, I think, a fault of the big democracies of the West. During the 90s, they saw Latin American countries as markets, and they didn't see any difference between, I wouldn't say even Brazil, a country like Argentina or Chile or Colombia, and a country like Vietnam and Thailand and Singapore. And they said, well, Thailand is growing more, so what should I do negotiations with Argentina, which is growing less? Okay, good. Hercules has not been to Thailand, I think. Anyway, and now, okay, the West tends not to think about markets that much anymore because the economy is no longer the center. The center is woke ideology. So now they don't care because about Latin America and China, Russia, Iran, and organized crime running the show in Latin America because the narco-socialist leaders of Latin America make the right noises about the climate and about gender. So they don't care. They don't care what is below this, which is just this 667 million people who consider themselves part of the West, by the way, being lost to that sort of enslavement program. And to finish, freedom. Freedom is our common ground, I think, here, very clear. It will take fight for freedom to be preserved and expanded. For that, we need to love freedom. It's not enough to advance freedom. You can work for something that you rationally value, but you only fight for something you love. Thank you.
Thank you, Ernesto. Now we still have time to a quick lunch. It will be held in the courtyard. And for those who get back to the hotel after lunch, just keep in mind that the bus will leave at 3:20 p.m. So we still have like more than 45 minutes. And thank you all, and we hope that you had a wonderful time in Madrid. See you soon.